Flavor Flav! Yeah, boy! You know what time it is. It's time for the Touchdown Black and Gold vlog. For those of you who have joined us before, we welcome you back. For those of you, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. And what took you so long? I am coming to you live once again in the studio, the man cave. And it is great to be here because football is days away. Oh, rejoice! The divinity, college football is here. Ah, the divine light has returned, people. I am your host, Blair Parks. I represent the black and gold of the Iowa Hawkeyes. And for those of you who are tuning in today to catch a glimpse of the normal co-host of this vlog, the eye candy, the living Adonis, the smiling Mona Lisa himself, I hate to break hearts, smash dreams, but my co-host Charlie is out on assignment today with the big network. He will join us hopefully next week, but he will be back as soon as he can. And Charlie, he represents the black and gold of the Missouri Tigers. Today, I am so excited to be here. I've already stated football is basically back. 2 days from today is week 0. We definitely will have a pretty in-depth preview of the 5 games that are on tap. 3 of those are noteworthy, and especially one is good on good. But how this is going to work out today, I have 4 topics to discuss with you. As normal, right out of the gate, we are going to have updated storylines and headlines. Then we will move into the week 0 preview. Then we will move into in-depth conference, the Power 5 conferences. I will give you a preview of each of those today. Now, for time constraints, next week's episode, I will mention the non-Power 5 teams that you all need to be aware of, and also the independents. So I will give you a in-depth conference breakdown preview, and then I will reveal to you the previews, more in depth, of both Missouri and Iowa, as far as what their records are projected by myself and Charlie. I do have his information with me to share with you. The teams' predicted ceilings, how high we could see them go, and their floors, how low we could see them go, in case things don't necessarily pan out the way that we are predicting. So, I am ready to get it. Let's get this done. And hopefully, at the end of this episode, you can simply walk away being informed, having fun, but also ask yourself this question, and I hope the overwhelming answer will be yes. Were you not entertained? Were you not entertained? Anyway, let's get it, y'all. So, our first topic of the day, let's go ahead and talk about some updated storylines and headlines in the college football landscape. And these continue to just trickle in every single week. A trickle there, I think of the old NASCAR racer, Dick Trickle. What a great name. But the updated storylines and headlines. Our first storyline headline of this week is something that Charlie and I had not really got around to mentioning to you folks yet. That is the onset of NIL. And what that stands for is name, image, and likeness. So to further explain to you what that really means, what does it all mean, Basil? Let's talk about it. So recently, over the summer, the Supreme Court, the highest functioning committee of interpretation of laws in this nation, one of the 3 branches, did vote unanimously 9-0 in favor of NIL coming to fruition, or 9-0 against the NCAA. And what they have basically said, their explanation was that the NCAA, by making the oodles and millions of dollars that they have each and every year from these student athletes and their accolades, their actions on the fields, on the courts, that it violated antitrust laws in this nation. Last week, I shared this with you. Wrap your head around this number. Last year, with COVID-19, the Big Ten Conference, my conference, even though we did not have fans in the stands, still made $768 million. So right there, the primary generating revenue of that number is college football. Not just sales, but primarily the television contracts, eyes on the games, and revenue from that. Now that is a huge number, but it also needs to be, because primarily that money will also help supply scholarships for the so-called non-revenue and Olympic sports. And some of those would be softball, baseball, volleyball, soccer, wrestling, swimming, and diving. Sports that definitely are awesome to watch, especially as an Iowa fan. The wrestling team, a true dynasty in the history of college athletics, and they just won last year's NCAA championship, so congrats, fellas, on the mat. But that number is significant because it does supply the numbers, the money for those scholarships. So what the Supreme Court basically said is it is not fair that these student athletes are generating this revenue for you, but what is their reward? What is their perk? When the NCAA for so long had limited what they could and could not accept. For example, if somebody wanted to, your favorite star player, you see them on the street, you walk up to them, you ask for a selfie, you ask for an autograph, they gladly sign it, but they say, that's going to cost you $20. In the old days, not in my house, like the KB Matumbo would say. But now, with NIL being legal, they actually can now profit off of their name, image, and likeness. So basically, any funds that they can create, they absolutely can attain some percentage of that. Now, the reason why I'm not going to spend much time on this is since it's brand spanking new, right off of the teletype, we don't really know how this is going to affect this great game yet. There are a lot of opinions. Will this eventually lead to a pay-to-play format? Will it basically, in the end, will it just be a glorified intramural schedule? Will we become the minor leagues to where now players are thinking only of themselves and their future in the NFL? These are all questions that remain to be answered. It's basically, in my opinion, it is going to take at least a full recruiting cycle to see that. Is the rich going to get richer? And will this potentially even increase the separation of the imbalance of competition that we have in college football? I mean, look around. That is obvious with the playoffs. We know 3 out of the 4 teams who are probably going to be in it today. It's not a really big-time push or, I'm going to take a risk and forecast these 3 out of the 4 because it probably will happen. So we will have to wait and see what is the fallout from NIL being here. And as far as I look at it, there has to be some sort of guidance on what is legal, what is barely legal, definitely illegal, but we don't really seem to have that. And it seems to me from how I look at this is as long as a university doesn't allocate or offer money to a recruit or a player, as long as it is from an outside donor or third party, it is totally legal. So we will have to see what happens to this great sport. time will tell. Stick with us. We will definitely at some point, whether it's this season or next season or further down the line, we will circle back to this and look at it more in depth. The next big headline that broke this week was the forming of the alliance, the Rebel Alliance between the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 to, in my eyes, counter the empire of the SEC. My Star Wars quotes, gotta love them. So what this has done, those three commissioners of the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 came together this week and announced publicly that moving forward, they are going to collaborate and be in unison together, focusing on NCAA governance, the safety and well-being of student athletes, protect the collegiate model, and also for scheduling components, and also giving them a good stance and opinion for the upcoming college football expansion, which is going to happen. So basically all that really was, as I referred to, is just a way for them to combat the SEC. Cue the Imperial March, if we have it, which we don't. So in your heads, dun, 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 dun. That is what those three commissioners of those conferences believe is going on, that the SEC, with the addition of Oklahoma and Texas, are definitely flexing their muscles. So, and when I do that, I know that is pathetic. I know I hate to, once again, if Charlie were here, he would give you real muscles. So you're stuck with this and all of this today, people. My apologies. So those three have formed a union basically to check the power of the SEC, who is definitely increasing their influence in their sphere of power. So scheduling components, there already are several contests that are scheduled for the future. I mean, for example, the ACC and Big Ten have the annual ACC Big Ten Challenge on the hard courts for both men and women. So those things will continue to go on. They will try to add further competitions in football, basketball, volleyball, you name it. But also another thing, and this was a major point for why this alliance was formed, is that they want to have an equal say in the playoff. How it is going to look like, what are the pros and cons, just to make sure that their brands, their conferences are not left out in the wind and the dust. Like the Big 12, unfortunately, it is not looking, it's not looking very promising for the Big 12. But as I stated in episode 1, I hope they do stay. So the Rebel Alliance against the SEC, the Empire. We'll see what plays out with this. The next, our last headline of this episode, which, since we do have previews and previews and previews, I have cleverly named this episode Season 1, Episode 3, Previews, Previews, Previews. Our last headline is this is breaking. This is almost as monumental as playoff expansion, as conference realignment, NIL, that LSU this week announced that to attend Tiger home games, go Tigers, individuals had to either prove vaccination via their vaccination card or supply a negative PCR test for COVID-19 within 72 hours of kickoff. This is monumental, especially when you look at the region of this country. In Louisiana, there has been a good amount of vaccination hesitancy, but this really, it just sends shockwaves. I definitely believe other schools will follow suit. The first school, Division I, who did this was Tulane, who is also located, the Green Wave, there in Louisiana. But the first Power 5 schools that announced similar policies for attendance was Oregon, and Oregon State followed Oregon the next day and saying this is what you have to provide in order to attend games. Whether you are pro or con vaccination, we're not going to talk about that today. Remember, this is not a political vlog, and to me, this is not a political issue. This is a responsibility, humane topic. This is not something that's political to me. But I absolutely agree with what LSU has done, and I definitely think other schools will do this. But it really depends on state to state, not conference by conference. So normally I give a nice little golf clap, but for LSU, I give you the full standing ovation. Job well done. And why I say that, people, is we need to do what we can to protect the things that we love. College football is a love to some of us. Last year, it was taken away from a fan perspective across the Big Ten footprint. And make no mistake, football will go on. These games will be played, but I'm talking from the perspective of let's not lose it again. Let's each do our part to make sure that it is secure and safe and that we can attend and love it once again for all the reasons why we love it. The traditions, the tailgates, the marching bands, the food, the national anthem, the flyover, and then the moment your team comes out of the tunnel to their fight songs. I mean, just thinking of that almost brings a tear to my eye, a tear of happiness. But hopefully we do not lose it again this year. So please, let's be responsible, let's do our part so we can nip this guy in the butt. So the things that we love, our passions, our hobbies, are not stripped away of us again. So kudos to LSU. Job well done. So that is our headlines for this week. Next topic. So far, so good. Now, we have a Week 0 preview. And this is big time. We are 2 days away from football. Now, to me, Week 0 kind of starts the official kickoff week. So this is what we have. We have 5 games that are going to be played this Saturday. Now, 3 of those we will spend some time with, but really 1 we are going to spend a little extra time on. So the first game worth mentioning is UCLA hosts Hawaii in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Now, I wholeheartedly expect UCLA to win, as do most people, because if you recall from previous episodes, I do believe this is a make-or-break year for Coach Chip Kelly there at UCLA. So getting a win against Hawaii definitely does not cool that seat down any. But the reason why this is huge and noteworthy is Week 1. Week 1, we have some excellent matchups right out of the gate. LSU, remember, travels to UCLA on opening night. So a victory for UCLA over Coach O and the Tigers, go Tigers, would go a long way to cooling off Chip Kelly's seat, and maybe those butt cheeks wouldn't be puckering so much. So it's a good tune-up game, a good experience game for UCLA, basically in preparation for LSU coming to their house on opening night. The next noteworthy game is I have to give some shout out and some love to the defending Mountain West champions, the San Jose State Spartans. San Jose State last year won the Mountain West kind of out of nowhere, and they return a ton of experience from last year's campaign. They open with a mighty tough Southern Utah team at home in San Jose. But the reason is this is once again a perfect time for a tune-up game because Week 1 They travel to LA to take on the USC Trojans in the Coliseum. So San Jose State has a tune-up game under their belt, work out a little kinks. Now, can they shock the world and beat USC? You'll have to stand by for our pick segment next week. I will let you know if I am bold enough, or I guess in certain people's opinions, stupid enough to pick the Spartans over the Trojans. What an epic battle in the Coliseum. Trojans versus Spartans. I think we've seen this at some point before. So that is another noteworthy game. San Jose State and Southern Utah in preparation for week 1. Now the big game, huge. The Big Ten is on full display here in week 0. The big time game, the only game that is Power 5 versus Power 5 is Nebraska travels to Champaign to take on Illinois. And the reason why this game has taken up so much more meaning is, if you've been paying attention to our shows and also headlines, that Scott Frost, that seat is absolutely en fuego. It is on fire. Even before last week, when it broke that Nebraska was currently under NCAA investigation due to having off-field organized workouts during COVID, and also using too many analysts as coaches on the field, this only adds more fire to Scott Frost's seat to be replaced. And I've got to say it, a lot of Nebraska fans, to me, it's really 50-50. Some of them have absolutely stated that they are ready to move on and that it just is not a good fit for their program. But the equal amount still are backing Coach Frost, saying give him more time. He's our man. He's doing great. I even saw on Corn Nation, which is an outlet for Nebraska Huskers fans, one of their experts predicted 9-3. Sorry, that ain't gonna happen. Yes, you have to play the games, and stranger things have happened before, but that ain't gonna happen. And adding more fuel to the fire, why I believe no matter what he does now, Scott Frost, he gone at Nebraska, is because he has now been asked to lawyer up separately from Nebraska's lawyers. So that shows right there, the Nebraska program and the university, the upper echelon, are trying to separate themselves as much as possible from Scott Frost, to where they can show our hands are clean, we had nothing to do with this, but also they can prove negligence and potentially dismiss him without supplying his buyout. So the wheels are in motion. Scott Frost's time in Nebraska is done. We need to accept the inevitable. But getting back, so a big game for Coach Frost, but also a big game for Coach Brett Bielema at Illinois, who's making his debut on the Fighting Illini sidelines. And you know, I have said I love this hire by Illinois, a man who had nothing but great success at Wisconsin, knows the conference, knows the landscape, has recruiting ends within the footprint, and he takes over an Illinois squad that has so many super seniors back. They're at home. Nebraska is favored by 7 points, people. I do not see that. If I was a betting man, it would be tempting to take Illinois. But the fans will be there. They're hungry after a season of not seeing their teams in person. I will give my prediction on this. We don't have a pick segment this week. That'll be next week. But I do not see how Nebraska leaves Illinois with a victory. I'm going Illinois with the W in convincing fashion. Now, when I say convincing, that doesn't necessarily mean they are going to, I see them winning by 20, 30 points. That's not it. But it's one of those to where it'll be the scoreboard will show it being closer than what it really was. I think it'll be very one-sided. Illinois brings home the W. But, wow, the Big Ten. The Big Ten is back. And that also is something worth noting, is next week being opening weekend, nothing is bigger than the Clemson and Georgia contest. That isn't, in my eyes, not only the best non-conference game of the year, it might be one of the biggest games in general of the year as far as where those two teams want to end up. And they both have expectations to reach the college football playoff, as they always do. But the Big Ten is in full display during Week 0 and Week 1. I've already mentioned we have Nebraska at Illinois, but next Thursday, a week from today, Minnesota hosts Ohio State. On Saturday, at 11 o'clock, Penn State travels to Wisconsin. And actually on Friday night, Michigan State travels to Northwestern. And Saturday, the afternoon, we have the big game. Indiana travels to Iowa. The Big Ten is absolutely put on a pedestal for Week 1, so enjoy it. All right, so let's go ahead now and transition into our next topic, which is our conference previews. Now today, I am only going to give previews. I am not going to give you today my predictions as far as who I believe will win this division or this conference, and these two teams will meet up in the conference title game. That'll be next week, so there's a little teaser. But I will give you the front runners and maybe a surprise team in this division or this conference that can maybe make some noise or at least play the spoiler. Let me get a quick swig of water. So let's get it. Oh, this is so great. I feel like this seat is just floating. I'm just on cloud 9. You want me? I want you, baby. My sugar boo. I'm levitating. That's how I feel. Our first conference that I'm going to discuss with you is the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC. And the division that I am first going to discuss is the Atlantic Division, which this is basically the Clemson division. That's how it's been the last several years. Clemson, to me, is the favorite to win the division, but there are two teams that I think could give them some fits. Now, I'm not saying these two teams are going to win, but these, to me, are the only roadblocks for Clemson winning that division. The first one is Boston College. BC played very good football last year. They have 18 starters back. Now, Clemson, they are breaking in a brand new backfield. DJ Ucla, I've been practicing that. He is the new QB at Clemson. He did get some playing time last year. When Trevor Lawrence was out with COVID-19, he did see some real-time, real-life action and almost pulled off the victory in South Bend at Notre Dame. So DJ has some experience, but there is still going to be some growing pains. And also gone is their all-world running back in Travis Etienne. So Clemson will be a little vulnerable at times, but the talent gap that they have, I don't expect that vulnerability to last very long. It'll be like on Star Trek, the Borg. You can have 4 or 5 shots, then they will adapt. Then they will be invincible. But Boston College definitely is a team that could give them some fits. Another team that I believe that can make it a little stressful for Clemson is North Carolina State, the Wolfpack, who have 17 starters back, both their quarterback and their running back. A very good team. Last year, they handed Liberty, the Flames, Liberty, their only loss. So NC State does have a lot of experience, and they also host Clemson early in the season. So I believe that'll be the best chance for Clemson to take a loss on their conference schedule. Will be at NC State. The schedules for the three, Clemson, as I stated, goes to NC State and to Pittsburgh. They host BC, they host Florida State. They do not play the two heavyweights from the Coastal Division, Miami or North Carolina. Boston College travels to Clemson. They host NC State, VTech, and Florida State, and they do not either play Miami or USC. Now, NC State, they do have a very tough conference schedule. They do host Clemson, as I stated, but they travel to BC, to Miami, but also play North Carolina at home. So they, hands down, have the toughest draw of conference schedule for somebody in the Atlantic. So, we'll see what plays out in the ACC Atlantic Division. The Coastal Division, to me, will be a little bit more competitive. The two teams that really have separated themselves are North Carolina and Miami. North Carolina comes in with one of my predicted Heisman finalists in quarterback Sam Howell. Miami has 19 starters back, and that's 10 on offense, including a dynamite quarterback in De'Ara King, a name most of you, if you don't know of it, you definitely will. He is exciting. He can make plays happen. So those are the two that I think are really going to battle it out. And if I had to pick a surprise team, one team that could maybe wreak a little havoc in the Coastal is going to be Pittsburgh. Schedule breakdown. North Carolina travels to Pitt, to NC State, but they host Miami, which is key. They host Miami and Florida State, and they do not play Clemson or Boston College. Miami, their schedule breakdown, they're at North Carolina, at Pittsburgh, at Florida State, and they host North Carolina State. And they don't play Clemson or BC either. So, looking at it, Miami does have a little bit tougher going for a conference schedule. Now, I will supply this too, my conference games of the year. These are the games that will go the furthest in showing who goes where for college football playoff. So they are huge determining factors. And this one is a slam dunk for me. It has to be on October 16th. Miami goes to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The winner of that game will, in my eyes, potentially be the front runner to win the Coastal. So that is your conference game of the year. Moving on to the Big 12. Dun, 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 dun. The Big 12 still is around, but as we know, Oklahoma and Texas will be departing to the SEC no later than the 25-26 season, but I believe it will be sooner. So let's break down the Big 12. The two teams that everyone is talking about is Oklahoma and Iowa State. Now, you know me, I have gone on record, I have shown my vulnerabilities, but they are not. I am so high on this Iowa State squad. But Oklahoma, they have Spencer Rattler back, a QB who I also believe will be a Heisman Trophy finalist. But they have high expectations for their defense. They don't return a lot of defensive starters, but for some reason, that is what the key to their overall success will be. They will score points, but can they slow other people down? Iowa State returns, I believe 19 starters. They do have running back Breece Hall back, who I believe will also be another Heisman Trophy finalist. 19 returning starters. And last week, episode 2, if you want to rewatch or watch it for the first time, I give the personnel, more specifically, who's back for the Cyclones. It is impressive. Now, a surprise team, I think TCU is flying a little bit under the radar. They're on my radar. Bing, bing, bing. But still, no one, it seems to me that the only two teams in people's eyes who can win this conference are Oklahoma and Iowa State. Now, TCU, they have 18 returning starters, and they have a quarterback, a hard-nosed kid, kind of a run-pass option, tough-nosed kid, does not run from a hit, doesn't run out of bounds, doesn't slide, is quarterback Max Duggan. Basically going to be one of my players to watch this year. So they will be my surprise team with their 18 starters returning. Now here is the schedule breakdown of those three. OU, they're at Kansas State, which Kansas State you're thinking, who? Who? Kansas State has beat them twice. They have a 2-game winning streak against Oklahoma. So that might be mind games playing with OU. But because they do have to go to Manhattan, to the house that Schneider built, former Iowa coach, Hayden Fry disciple. So we will keep our eyes on that game. Can OU get over the hump against the Wildcats? They do host TCU. They do host West Virginia, who I think is another potential cusp surprise team, but I'm not ready to give them so much props yet. But the big thing is they host Iowa State. That hands down, they have the easiest road to the Big 12 title game because of that conference schedule. Iowa State, tough draw. They go to Oklahoma, which is near the end of the year. So by then, that game could be not just for all the marbles in the Big 12, but potentially playoff ramifications. Iowa State also goes to West Virginia, but they host Texas and TCU. So that is kind of a split right down the middle, pretty fair draw for a conference schedule. TCU, oof, tough draw for their conference hopes. They travel to OU, Oklahoma, to Iowa State, host Texas, host West Virginia. Hands down the toughest slate for a conference schedule in the Big 12. And if you notice there, I did not even mention Texas being a surprise team. I think this is going to be an 8-4, maybe 9-3 kind of year for Texas during the transition to a new coaching staff and Steve Sarkisian. Time will tell. My conference game of the year, another slam dunk to me, without question, is November 20th when Iowa State travels to Norman, Oklahoma. Huge game. Huge. Next conference, we have the Pac-12. Now, the Pac-12 has been the whipping boy of the Power 5 for far too long. They play a great brand of football, but the eyes really aren't on it. Not even the Ides of March. Because of their location on the West time zone, you have to stay up very late to watch their primetime players and their primetime games. Here in the Central time zone where I'm at, I'm up at 9 o'clock to watch the kickoff. But by 11 o'clock, starting the second half, midnight, I'm in and out of sleep. So if they kick off earlier than 9 o'clock, I will try my best to watch, but it's just as difficult. And especially even more difficult for those of you in the East time zone. But the Pac-12 has two divisions just like the ACC. Now, the Big 12, which I just went through, they play everybody, so they don't have divisions. The Pac-12, let's start with the Pac-12 North. Two teams, and I think maybe one potential surprise team. You have Oregon and Washington. Oregon is the highest ranked preseason Pac-12 team, 16 returning starters, but they did lose their quarterback in the offseason who transferred. So we'll see how the new quarterback is, but they recruit at the highest level. This kid might be wet behind the ears, but he is talented. Whoever they put in the game, because of their roster, they'll be fine. The potential is absolutely there. It just comes down to reps and cohesion with the team. Washington is the only other team that can maybe challenge Oregon and vice versa. Washington, to me, is the most balanced Pac-12 team, whether they're in the North or the South. My surprise team in the Pac-12 North is the Cal Golden Bears. I think Cal will not potentially win the division, but could they knock off a couple of the heavyweights and reshape the standings in the Pac-12? Absolutely. So the schedule breakdown of the Pac-12 North. Oregon travels to Washington, to UCLA, and to Utah. They do not play against USC and Arizona State. So they have a very tough road schedule, especially going to Washington, UCLA, and Utah. That is tough. Washington, they host Oregon and Arizona State, the Sun Devils, and UCLA. They do not play crossover games against USC and Utah. So it is a little bit more favorable, their conference schedule, the Huskies, than the Ducks. So we shall see what plays out. Now the Pac-12 South, and hold on, prepare yourselves, those of you in SEC country and even in Big 12 country, for what I'm about to say. And saying it, maybe I wholeheartedly expect an angry mob will be outside my door with torches and pitchforks in an hour. The Pac-12 South, because it is so competitive, it will be the most competitive division in college football this season. And Oregon and Washington are also very good. So the Pac-12, to me, will be the most competitive conference top to bottom. There are 4 teams in the South that can either finish first or last in their division. There's not much separation here, in my eyes. Those teams are USC, UCLA, Utah, and Arizona State. USC, Clay Helton, another coach on my hot seat, but there are big expectations for the Trojans, as there always is there in Los Angeles. UCLA, Chip Kelly, I've already mentioned, hot seat. He has a chance, he has every opportunity to cool it off with a win Week 0 and beating LSU in Week 1, which you'll have to watch next week's game to see what I choose in that game, either the Bruins or the Tigers. Utah, they have 19 starters returning. I am very high on this Utah, the Utes squad, the 2 Utes. Mr. Gambini, what is a Ute? The 2 Utes. Youths. The Utah Utes. I am very high on this squad. 19 starters return, and that's not including, if this name sounds familiar to you, here's why. Quarterback Charlie Brewer. He transferred to them in the offseason. He previously had great success, was a great success at the Baylor Bears when they challenged Oklahoma 2 or 3 years ago. I have to see what that season was for the conference crown. Actually, it was 2 years ago. So he will be in Utah as long as they can keep him healthy and upright. He does have a history of concussions, and I never want to see an athlete, especially an amateur athlete, get dinged up and hurt. So as long as they keep him healthy, expect big things from the Utah Utes. Arizona State, Herm Edwards also on the coaching hot seat. But they have a another dynamite player in quarterback Jaden Daniels. He is a potential game changer. The scheduling breakdown for these teams, USC, they travel to the desert to play Arizona State, but then they host Utah and UCLA, and they do not have crossover games with Oregon or Washington. Hands down, the best schedule in the Pac-12 conference for their conference games. UCLA, the flip side of this, they go to USC, to Utah, to Washington, host Arizona State and Oregon. They play everybody who is good in the Pac-12. Hands down the toughest draw for a conference schedule. Utah, they go to USC, but they host Arizona State, UCLA, and Oregon. So overall, a very favorable draw for the Utes. Arizona State travels to Utah, to UCLA, and to Washington, but hosts USC. So also a little more daunting of a schedule for the Sun Devils. The conference game of the year. Now this was, maybe can be a little bit debated. Let me know what you think. Most people would choose the conference game of the year would be Oregon and Washington. I am not. I believe the more important game, which is going to shift the landscape in the Pac-12, is going to be on November 20th, same day as Iowa State at Oklahoma. It's going to be a big day for college football, but every day is a big day for college football. Is Oregon travels to Utah. That is my conference game of the year. For example, if Oregon takes a loss, does Washington jump them in the standings in the North? Does Utah take a loss? Does USC or UCLA or somebody else jump them in the standings? So it is a huge swing game for that conference, top to bottom. So that's my breakdown of the Pac-12. So far, to quote David Pumpkins, any questions? I didn't think so. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit the pause key. This is my pause button. Pause. I still have to give you my SEC and my Big Ten conference breakdowns. But before I do that, I am going to share with you the next topic. I'm going to unveil to you our schedule breakdown of both Missouri, the black and gold, and the black and gold of Iowa. And I do have Charlie's information here on Missouri, our in-house SEC expert. I would never call myself a Big Ten expert because I'm dumber than a box of sand, which that proves it. Most people there would say a box of rocks. I can't even say that right. So there, the proof's in the pudding. So let's start with Missouri. So the projected records that we both have for the Missouri Tigers. Charlie has them going 9-3, but I have them going 8-4. Now, let's break down this schedule. The losses that Charlie believes they will have is they will lose at Kentucky, at home against Texas A&M, and at Georgia. Very similar to mine. But I also have Missouri losing at Arkansas. But I actually have them beating Texas A&M. So their fourth loss to me will be at home against Florida. Now, they are going to have several opportunities. Mizzou has lots of chances for a signature win this year. Neither of us expect them to really challenge Georgia potentially or Florida for a division title, but they're going to have every chance to slip in and slide into either the second or third place spot in that division based on their schedule. Their schedule does set up very well for them overall. He has them losing to A&M. I have them pulling the upset of their season because the week before, once again, box of sand, the week before, A&M has the biggest game of their schedule and their season in hosting Alabama. Alabama will be a little bit vulnerable out of the gate. It's an early season game, so A&M will put everything they have, I believe, into the defeat or loss against Alabama. Either way, this bodes great for Missouri because they will put so much into the previous week's game. Now they get to come on the road to sleepy Columbia, Missouri. For an absolute letdown game, or as Admiral Akbar would say, it's a trap. Texas A&M is the Missouri game for them is a trap game. That is Missouri's signature win this year. I am calling it right now. They will defeat Texas A&M. In the Florida game, we'll have to wait and see what happens with their season. Florida is replacing oodles of talent that left due to graduation or early removal for the NFL. But that game is late in the year, so I could see Missouri having a great shot to upset the Gators at home, moving in maybe into that second spot in the SEC East. Time will tell. So he has them 9-3. I have Missouri 8-4. I also asked Charlie last week to give us the absolute ceiling and the floor of where he thinks Missouri could be. He has them going as high as 10-2 and a floor of 7-5. We're very close on this. I have their ceiling being 9-3 and their floor being 6-6. I asked Charlie to give me what he believed was Missouri's biggest game of the year, and I also will share mine with you. His biggest game of the year is Week 2. Early conference game, Mizzou goes on the road to Lexington to take on Kentucky. And this is a big game. Absolutely. It's not what I believe is Missouri's biggest game, but this is a huge swing game for them. Missouri has lost the last 3, I believe, at Kentucky. It has been a highly contested game for the better half of a decade. No, not one team seems to have the other's number. It just goes back and forth, up and down, like this show, like the elevator business. Terrible dad joke, by the way. My biggest game for Mizzou this year is at home against Tennessee. Tennessee is down, so you want to keep them down for recruiting and prestige. So if Mizzou wants to continue to climb the ladder in the SEC East, you have to consistently beat those that are at your level or below you so you can continue to rise. So I think the Tennessee game is their biggest game. All right. So we are very close to wins and losses and records. Now let's move on to my Iowa Hawkeyes, or our Hawkeyes. I have them going 8-4 on the year. Charlie has Iowa also going 8-4. So we are dead even, eye to eye on this, but we do have losses and wins a little bit off. But first of all, let me backtrack, rewind. Remember, pause is here, rewind is here. So the losses, if I did share that with you, my losses for Mizzou, I do have them losing at Kentucky, at Georgia, Florida at home, and at Arkansas. Okay, so I do believe that Kentucky will be a loss when Charlie believes that will be a win. I just think that early on it's tough. If it was week 3 or 4, tough environment, they would have a better chance to win that game. But time will tell. So Iowa, we both have them projected to go 8-4. Now, I have Iowa's losses as following. I have Iowa losing to Iowa State, to Maryland, right? That's right, you heard. Wisconsin, and this pains me to say, Black Friday, I'm eating leftovers, turkey sandwich, turkey salad. You can broil it, fillet it. You know, there'd be turkey burger, turkey salad. You know, Bubba would go on and on. I have them losing to Nebraska. Charlie has their losses at Iowa State, home against Penn State, at Wisconsin, and at Northwestern. Now, let me tell you why I believe they will lose at Maryland. They play Maryland, that's on the road. It's in our nation's capital on a Friday night. So a short work week, travel week, and I think they are just due for a potential letdown on a Friday night. Wisconsin, you know, Wisconsin, they're our daddy. I mean, the conference title game goes through Madison, Wisconsin, as it does every year. Like I believe in the SEC East, it goes through Athens, Georgia. That Wisconsin, I think, will also knock us off. And Nebraska, we have defeated them, I believe, 4 in a row. I actually might want to check on that. It might be even longer. Actually, I think it's 5 in a row. 5 or maybe even 6. We have a extended losing streak winning streak against Nebraska. But I think this is the year to where that does end. I think Iowa has another letdown. Nebraska gets up. Their season's on the line. Maybe this gets them to that 6th win, maybe 7. And that's why initially I believed this victory would get Scott Frost another year or 2. But now with the investigation, with the shenanigans in the offseason, threatening to leave the Big Ten if they didn't play football, to play against other conference opponents, potentially having a hand in canceling the Oklahoma game, it's still not going to save his job. Now, Charlie has them losing to Penn State at home. I definitely think this is a better Iowa team. I think Penn State still has some question marks. Can quarterback Sean Clifford throw the ball consistently and accurately? I don't think so, but maybe he's cleaned it up with more reps in the offseason. So I believe Iowa's signature win this year will be a tie from Penn State or Indiana. Indiana, the opening game. Huge game. I've already stated on this episode that the Big Ten is on full display week 0 and week 1, but I do believe this will be the most competitive, thrilling game. And I think Iowa will get it done potentially because of the crowd returns, the defense, but tune in next week to see what my official pick is. So the biggest games. Now, before I give you that, my projected ceiling for Iowa is 10-2, and the floor is also 6-6. If things just don't go their way, I could see them being a 500 ball team. There's a lot of things that still they have to work on, the kinks to ensure that you're going to have your typical Iowa squad between 9 and 7 wins. The biggest game for Iowa, Charlie believes it is the home game against Penn State, which he has them losing. It is a big game. It definitely is going to then further set up what the rest of the conference season looks like, especially if Iowa were to lose out of the gate to Indiana. Then those early season games are almost potential must wins to keep pace with Wisconsin. My biggest game for Iowa is Wisconsin. Once again, I think the two main contenders for the Big Ten West will be Wisconsin and Iowa, and I'll give you my surprise team here in a little bit when I continue my conference breakdowns. So that's why I don't have Mizzou at Georgia the biggest game, because Missouri I think is still 1 year away from really being able to challenge for the division crown. I think Iowa is much closer than they are to challenging Wisconsin. So to me, that is absolutely the biggest game of the year. You lose to Iowa State, you lose a non-conference game. It doesn't hurt you in the long haul. Obviously, Clones fans will be chirping how, they're better than the Hawkeyes. It's a friendly rivalry, but Iowa State is just going to be really good. So that is where we see Missouri and Iowa ending the years, and the floors and the ceilings. Time will tell. Now, I am going to say this, that these predictions can change. This is what we are predicting today on Thursday. What is today's date even? I think the 26th. So these can change. An injury can definitely swing things in your favor or against you. The elements, how is the team morale? Are you on a losing streak, a winning streak, going into what you perceive as a victory or a loss? So these can change. But at the end of the season, we are going to compare and archive these and see where we finished. So we will update these as the season progresses. But that's where we are with the Iowa and Missouri schedules. Any questions? Feel free. We've mentioned this to you, our previous episodes. Feel free. We are doing this for not just our benefit, because we love college football. It's a passion. We want to share it with you, the family, the Black and Gold family. You are now family members. Feel free. Let us know how we're doing. Blow us up with comments. Just be a responsible adult about it. Go ahead, smash the like button, subscribe, share it with those you might think would enjoy us as well. We want your feedback, we want you involved, and we will absolutely share your comments, questions, concerns on the air as they come in. So please, do that for us. Don't hesitate. This is a neutral zone, the neutral zone. You are absolutely protected, and we foster your inputs. So please share them with us. So now to continue the subject of conference breakdowns, let's move into the mighty SEC. Now let's start with the West Division. And this one will be a highly contested division again, but when the smoke clears, You might have Alabama finishing on top yet again. But it will not be, in my mind, it will not be as competitive as the Pac-12 South. So Alabama, they are the reigning national champions yet again. You know, the beat goes on, yada, yada, yada. They have only 11 starters returning, and only 3 on the offensive side of the ball. Now, normally, that would be a cause of concern, especially when you are the #1 ranked team in this week's initial AP poll. But it is a plug-and-play program. It's next man up. You have multiple 4- and 5-star recruits on your roster. The talent is absolutely there for success, especially when you compare them to my program, Iowa, and also Missouri, Charlie's program. We are developmental programs. We don't have a stockpile of 4- and 5-stars. Yes, occasionally we get them. But what we are looking to do every year, what makes me happy as an Iowa fan, if they every 3rd or 4th year are a legitimate threat to win the Big Ten West, win and get to the Big Ten title game, that makes me happy. I have realistic expectations. I do want them to get to a bowl every year, but the typical Iowa season is what I've already mentioned, 9 to 7 wins, but every 3rd or 4th year, maybe 9, 10 or more. That is what makes me happy as a fan, to see the progress during the recruiting cycle. Unlike Alabama, which is, like I said, plug and play. Just like LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, you have the talent, smorgasbord, the who-hots to set you up for success rather than potential failure. LSU. So I think Alabama, if you are going to pin them, to finish up my Alabama, I think to pin a loss on them, it's better to do it early than late. And we've seen this from countless Nick Saban teams. A little bit early on, they have some kinks in the armor, but by the time the end of the season rolls around, they are prime time, ready to go. Next team, LSU. LSU has 18 starters returning, looking for that big bounce back year. I mean, 5-5 last year. They opted out of a bowl game. They were the reigning national champions last year, defending national champions. QB Max Johnson is a young potential stud. Watch him at that position at LSU. My surprise, Texas A&M, Texas A&M is another team that I think is a player in this division. They're replacing the vast majority of their offensive line and QB, Kellen Mond. So for me, this is a season where I ask, will the real Jimbo Fisher please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up. We will see if that large contract and salary, if he can keep them competitive where they were last season. We'll have to wait and see. My surprise team in that division has to be the Ole Miss Rebels. QB Matt Corral is an absolute game breaker. They are going to have a lot of firepower on offense because they are coached by the great Lane Kiffin. But defense cannot be optional, Ole Miss. If they can just tighten it up on the defensive side of the ball, then they maybe could be a major player in this division. But they are right now my surprise team on the radar. Boom, boom. So the schedule breakdowns. Alabama, they travel to Texas A&M. They host Ole Miss and LSU. Very favorable schedule. The easiest of those contenders to me in that division. LSU, tough. They travel to Alabama, to Ole Miss, but they host Texas A&M. So very tough conference schedule for the Tigers. Go Tigers. And that's without mentioning the non-conference games. Alabama plays Miami at a neutral site. LSU goes to UCLA. A&M, I believe they go to Colorado to the Elevation. But I'm not going to talk about non-conference games. This is conference only. So that is, and then A&M, they go to Ole Miss, to LSU, but they host Alabama. So it's a tough schedule as well, but not as tough as the LSU schedule. So now let's break down the East. where Mizzou presides, just like, so a great division, but I don't think it's going to be as competitive. So the East Division, Georgia. Georgia is the first team I have to mention. They have on their team one of my predicted Heisman finalists in quarterback JT Daniels. This is hands down, though, the best team that Kirby Smart has had there in Athens. They have been recruiting at a historic clip, but what JT Daniels brings them is something they have not had there since his arrival. Kirby Smart's arrival is a quarterback who can take them up and down the field offensively. So we will see how this season plays out. High expectations for the old Bulldogs and UGA. Next team, Florida. Florida will always be competitive because of the name on their jersey, how they recruit, and the athletes in the state of Florida, in the Sunshine State. But so much turnover from last season, this is a really hard team for me to forecast. I'm just going to have to put this one on the back burner, watch a few of their games, and see how they play. This is just tough for me, but we'll see. But they will be a competitor because they're Florida. Now, the next team is Missouri. I definitely think Missouri has the opportunity to finish second or third, and their schedule does set up very good for them. And we'll break those down here next. And they have a returning stud quarterback in Connor Bazelak. Their biggest weakness last year was on the defensive line. That unit at times just could not get their opponents off the field. They're a year older. They do return a lot of production, but they are what I think is going to make or break their chances in the SEC East and in the conference in general. So the schedule breakdown. Georgia, they host Kentucky, they host Missouri, and they do not play Alabama, LSU, or Texas A&M. I don't want to say easy schedule because that would offend so many of you SEC fans. Our conference is never easy, but this is easy. This sets up for great success for Georgia. They should absolutely roll during the regular season, but tune in next week and I will tell you if I believe they win their division or win the conference. Florida. Florida's schedule, they play at LSU, at Missouri, at Kentucky, and they host Alabama. So they have the toughest schedule draw in the SEC. And Georgia and Florida do play every year. They play this year at a neutral site. They're in Jacksonville. So Florida has hands down the toughest draw from that division for a conference schedule. And with their turnover, it's just we'll have to wait and see how this plays out on the field. Missouri, their schedule overall is very manageable. They go to Kentucky, to Georgia, but they host Florida and Texas A&M. So, very manageable. Georgia will be a tough task on the road. Kentucky, I've already shared with you, I believe they will lose that game, but I do believe they will beat A&M. And Florida, I think they have the potential. Late in the year, I will give you my prediction during the picks week for that week. That could also be for Florida a trap via Admiral Akbar, because that would be Florida's last SEC conference game, the week after they travel to sleepy Columbia, Missouri. They have their in-state rival, Florida State. So by then, if Florida is completely out of the SEC East race, if they're behind Georgia or Kentucky, that absolutely to me spells potential upset or trap game. It's a trap. Time will tell. My conference game of the year. This was a difficult one for me. It could have been LSU and Bama, but I believe because of how it can shape the college football invitations and how it's going to play out, to me it has to be Alabama at Texas A&M on October 9th. Wait to see what I pick on that. Our final conference, let's go to the Big Ten, my conference. Let's start in the East Division. Ohio State. They are Ohio State recruiting at a different galaxy, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That's where they're recruiting. But they are replacing quarterback Justin Fields, who is getting all of you Bears fans out there very excited, and for good reason. But they must tighten up on the defensive side of the ball. Giving up almost 30 points last year a game, that is very un-Ohio State-like. So they need to tighten it up on the defensive side of the ball. Indiana is my team on the rise. They are the most complete team to me in this division, both offensively, defensively. Last year, they only lost to Ohio State. And QB Michael Penix is an absolute game changer as well. Primetime player, but he's coming off of a knee injury that he sustained in the second half of the season after their Ohio State loss. So we will see how his health is really going to determine, is Indiana, are they a legitimate contender for the division? Yay or nay? Penn State. Penn State is looking for a huge bounce back. Last year did not start well in Happy Valley. Rumors of Coach Franklin being unhappy on the hot seat. I'm not ready to put him there yet, but they definitely need a bounce back. Sean Clifford, to me, that's where they have to progress him throwing the ball and making better decisions in the pocket. The guy can run, he can make some plays, but he has to be able to be more consistent throwing the ball. So let's break down, and my surprise team. And being a host of this show, I cannot pilot on a specific group, program, fan base. I can't do that. Michigan, to me, is one of those teams that I look forward to that game every year when Iowa plays them. My father, who taught me everything I know about Iowa football, always said it makes my year if Iowa knocks off Michigan and keeps them out of the Rose Bowl. But I absolutely respect the Michigan program, their fans. I mean, the winningest program in college football history. But I think it's tough for me to say that they're a surprise team. Michigan, first of all, opens this season not ranked. That in itself is an anomaly. That hardly ever happens. But there is no expectations for this year's Michigan team, which scares me. They're still Michigan. They recruit at a high level. I do believe Jim Harbaugh is a good coach. He already got his hair cut in the offseason, got his salary cut in half on the hot seat. I predicted that he will not be there next season, but I think it doesn't come down to the record at Michigan this year determining what his fate is. It comes down to how good do they look on the field. Are they competitive against Ohio State? I don't say they have to beat them. That would go a long way, but I'm not ready to sit here today and say that's going to happen. I don't want the men in white suits to show up and drag me out in a white suit myself. But how do they look? Do they look more competitive? And this Michigan team, because they are so under the radar, off of it, they scare me this year. They're going to have every opportunity to prove all of these pundits wrong, that they are basically losing traction to the upper echelon in their division. So let's break down the schedules in the Big Ten East. Ohio State plays at Minnesota, at Indiana, at Michigan. So a tough draw, tough road draw, but they do host Penn State. So the IU game is going to be tough for them. We'll have to wait and see. But overall, a very manageable schedule, but kind of a tough road schedule for the Buckeyes. Indiana, they travel to Iowa, to Penn State, to Michigan, but host Ohio State. And that may or may not be the conference game of the year. Stand by shortly and I will tell you. So their schedule, very daunting as well. I mean, playing those three high-caliber programs on the road will be a test. But then again, if they win two of those three, or maybe even one, they are going to be right where they need to be. Penn State. Penn State, hands down, has the toughest draw. for what needs to be a bounce back year. They play at Wisconsin, week 1, at Iowa, at Ohio State, but host Michigan and Indiana. That is an absolute murderer's row. But how they recruit, they potentially can prove us wrong and climb back to 2nd or 3rd or even win the division. So now the Big Ten West. Let me get a quick swig. The Big Ten West. These are the major players, maybe a surprise team. Wisconsin, 17 starters return. This is the most complete team in this division. I am very high on the Badgers. Normally, I'm the guy who believes they are overrated, but this year I think they are going to be scary good. They have every opportunity to not only win the division, but potentially knock off Ohio State. Time will tell. You'll see what I pick next week. Iowa is my Hawkeyes, I think, are in the best position to challenge Wisconsin. They return the most all Big Ten players from last season. So they do bring back a lot of primetime big players. But the biggest question mark is still the development of quarterback Spencer Petras. Last year as an Iowa fan, we saw the ups and downs, highs and lows, the progress, the growing pains of a first-year starting quarterback. But they did win 6 in a row, so he was doing something right. Now a surprise team in the Big Ten West is Minnesota. Minnesota, to me, is due for another big-time coming-out party kind of season like they had 2 years ago. Not just saying that because I am, I'm not jaded or favoring Coach P.J. Fleck, the bald beauty that he is, because I'm not going to say the same thing about my #1 man crush and Coach Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. But Minnesota is a veteran team. They bring back the 2nd most production in the Big Ten from last season, only behind Rutgers, of all teams, and they are going to be able to let their presence be known very early when they host Ohio State next Thursday night, biggest game of the Thursday night slate next week. So let's break down some schedules. Wisconsin, they travel to Minnesota. They host Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, and Northwestern. This is kind of one of those repeating records I've seen time and time again as an Iowa fan. The Big Ten offices making the schedule. This is hands down the easiest schedule for someone in the Big Ten West and anyone who is a potential contender for the conference crown. Wisconsin, easy conference schedule. Definitely very favorable. Iowa, they travel to Wisconsin and to Northwestern, actually in back-to-back weeks. So very difficult back-to-back travel weeks. But they host Indiana, Penn State, and Michigan. So a tough schedule for Iowa from a conference perspective. Now my conference game of the year, this is another surprise. Some would think Ohio State, Indiana, but to me, or Ohio State, Penn State potentially, because Wisconsin does not play Ohio State or Indiana, the two that I think are in the best position to win the East. But to me, it's actually November 27th when Ohio State travels to the Big House in Michigan. Because once again, this is going to determine the fate of Jim Harbaugh and where does the Michigan program go from here. Not that Michigan has to win once again, but how do they look? Can they compete and keep it close? So Ohio State and Michigan is my Big Ten conference game of the year. So that wraps up our conference previews and actually wraps up our subjects and topics for today. Looks like I made it. This has been fun, flying solo. Hopefully Charlie's back sooner than later. I know you want him back too. His good looks will be missed, and you're probably tired of looking at this. And I get it. Once again, I apologize. Feel free, share your comments. Let us know how we're doing. Smash the subscribe button like all the cool cats say. Share us, like us. We're here for you. So, next week, this is what's on tap. next week is, to me, official opening weekend. Our topics are going to be, as normal, updated storylines and headlines. Our conference predictions, who's going to win this division, who's going to face this team in the conference title game, who's going to, win this conference in that division, as I said. So our conference predictions are coming at you next week. I'll give you my non-Power 5 independent teams, some of those that you need to be made aware of, who are going to make some noise. So the non-Power 5 would be Conference USA, the Sun Belt, the MAC, the Mountain West, and the American Athletic, and maybe some independent teams that you'll want to become familiar with, the Notre Dames, Liberty, BYU, and maybe mention UConn and UMass, which I may not have to mention them at all. And then we'll also give you our playoff predictions, how we see everything coming out in the end, and our first week of Pick'em. And we are excited for the Pick'em segment next week. So, parting thoughts for today. Thank you for being with us. Help us out. Let's expand this. Thank you for lending me your ears, your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, your week. And thank yous. And for myself, Blair Parks, for Charlie Oswald, who's not here, we'll see you next week. Peace be the journey. Until then, have a good day. God bless. And we can't wait to see you on the Touchdown Black and Gold vlog. See you.